Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we've seen the long-awaited Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino's 60s movie LA love letter thing.
I was really looking forward to it.
So was I. I'm looking forward to any new Tarantino, to be honest.
Well, not me, actually. I wasn't looking forward to it because it was Tarantino. I was looking forward to it because it was about the movies in the 60s. And, so kind of, I thought that would be great fun. And it was.
I always look forward to Tarantino because he makes movies for the cinema, I guess. They always just come alive on the cinema
Well, he makes a
screen.
particular kind of film for the cinema. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But I know I'll be interested. And
I think
he'll make beautiful pictures and,
Well, I always find this film superficial. I think they're always about pop culture, and he's, I suppose there's a kind of they're fodder for philosophers because they can see Baudrillard in all of his films, right? So it's about the hyperreal. It's about not making distinctions between kind of the real and the image and so on. But actually, I just think that they're superficial. That they are often about a conception of life and people that is drawn from the movies, and then he never explores it with any depth. He always moves on to the next thing. So I'm not a fan.
Mm. And there was particular cause for trepidation with this, at least as far as I was concerned, because what I knew about it, what was kind of the scuttlebutt early on was it was about the Manson murders. It was about the Tate LaBianca murders in August 1969, which are infamously incredibly gruesome.
Yes.
Charles Manson told his family members as they went out to commit them, to make them as gruesome as possible.
Yes.
And what I didn't see coming, and this will be spoilers from here on in, is that Tarantino completely twists what happens, and actually these two drunk jackasses, played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, kill the Manson family and save the day.
No, it's not that simple. I mean, well, first of all, I'm not sure that it's, I mean, it is conceivable. I mean, I don't know the history, but it is conceivable that members of the gang, attempted one thing that didn't work out and then succeeded with Sharon Tate. Because from what I remember, the whole Manson murders were a kind of a sociological phenomenon when I was a kid. I remember in like 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, there was a little bookshelf of books that we were encouraged to take out upstairs, downstairs, and things like that. And one of them was Helter Skelter, which was like, I don't know if it was a novelization or an account of those murders. It was very much in the air in the early 1970s. And my understanding is that Manson was
he was part of Hollywood, or he was trying to become part of Hollywood.
And not only was he part of, but he was involved in the murder, right?
And that's not been my understanding, and that's kind of one of the kind of notable things, I guess, about it is that he never killed anyone. That's the idea.
Really? Is that it?
Yeah,
Okay.
But he's been in prison forever. Well, he died a couple of years ago, didn't he? As the leader of the cult. But no, he sent his people out to commit the murders.
Okay.
So that was kind of cause for concern, because I thought Tarantino, it's not like he shied away from violence and things like that before. And you think this could be the most tasteless thing I've ever seen in my life, was what I was thinking.
There were pretty tasteless moments.
There were, but what I didn't. But actually, the way that ending works, I think, is kind of the absolute proof that if you're killing the right people, you can do anything you want. The audience was laughing and cheering, and it was cartoon violence, really.
Yeah, it was.
If it had been if he'd been doing that as like a real enactment of the murders, you wouldn't have,
But actually, there's a paradox there, because I think the audience was also cheering because it was women getting their heads bashed against telephones. Right, because it's so inconceivable for that to happen in film. It almost never happens in film. That level of brutality is always reserved for men, right? So, for it to be happening for women in this thing was like...
That's certainly not how I read the audience response.
I mean, when have you seen women getting bashed like that?
No, I think that might be true, but that's not how I read the audience response, or it's not what I felt I responded to.
Well, Well, I think I did respond to that, actually, that, you know, you're so kind of shocked and surprised by what's happening, that it kind of makes it funny. Anyway, I'm thinking about it because, you know, Tarantino has so often been accused of being, like, really sexist and so on, and I think he is, you know. So, you know, the women in this film, they all have, like, really tiny supporting roles. They're always in the background. They're always girlfriends or whatever. But actually, that moment, I thought was a moment of, you know, egalitarianism, right? It's like, there's a fight.
The women get beaten up.
Everybody gets treated the same in that fight.
It's certainly true that Margot Robbie gets an incredibly thankless task, because she's got nothing to do as Sharon Tate. And she plays Sharon Tate as this very young, kind of new to Hollywood person who's been in one or two movies, goes to see... I mean, this is substantially her role, is she goes to see one of her own movies.
A Mad Helm film with Dean Martin, where she plays a supporting role.
And she sits in the theatre, and, you know, other people are kind of laughing and cheering at all the right points, and she gets incredibly proud, and she's smiling away, and she loves seeing herself on screen. And then she leaves the cinema a few hours later, beaming, and that's about it. And then 6 months later, she's heavily pregnant.
Yes, I love that.
But like she's got nothing. She is the only reason she's there, I think, is that you know from what you know of the Manson story that she will die later, or at least you suspect she will, because you don't see the twist coming. And, and she's just been set up as someone absolutely lovely and innocent and pure, and with nothing interesting.
That's true, but I think it's central because, you know, the legend is so involved in Hollywood lore, right? So, you know, the house that Sharon Stone and Roman Polanski are renting was the house of Doris Day's son, who was a really famous producer.
Right.
And Doris Day's son was going out with Candice Bergen, who, you know, was already on her way to becoming quite a big star, right? And Jay Sebring, who is with her, you know, was that... hairdresser agent who was the basis of Warren Beatty's character in Shampoo, right? So the film has kind of all of these resonances that kind of touch on, you know, all of the Hollywood history of the period, and the pivot to that is the Margot Robbie character.
Yeah, though it's not portrayed as such really. She just, I mean, in terms of what she does, she just happens to be there. It's not an interesting role to be given as an actor.
It's not an interesting role, but it's a pivotal one.
Yeah.
It's not made interesting, which is, you know, where I think, I mean, you know, you can... The accusations against Tarantino as sexist are very convincing. The Margot Robbie role is one reason why. And then all of the other kind of, you know, women in the film, the same. You know, the Italian wife, she's got nothing to do but scream, right? Yeah, and so on.
Yeah. I feel like as soon as the twist happened and you realise that the Manson family are going to get the shit beaten out of them, the moment that happened, I went, how did I not see it coming? Because it's called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And the reason that that's important is because in Inglourious Bastards, Tarantino's kind of fantasy about Nazi Germany, or Nazi France actually, that film starts off by saying Chapter 1, Once Upon a Time in Nazi-occupied France. And my mate Sam, he went to see that film, and he told me, you know, I thought it was really unrealistic, that film. Like, Hitler didn't get murdered in the cinema. What's going on? It's just weird. Yeah, and I said to him, well, the opening says Once Upon a Time in Nazi-occupied France, and it turned out that he'd been in the toilet for like the first 4 seconds of the film, had come in after that, so he thought it was like supposed to be a faithful, you know, reproduction or reenactment of actual history. So when all the weird stuff started happening, all the changes to history, it was like, what the fuck is this? Yes. And there was a part in that where, you know, the cinema owner character is changing the lettering on the outside of the cinema, and she's putting up L'Enfer by Clouseau, which is famously unfinished. It was never released. And like that's kind of one of these little things, like this is a fantasy world for Tarantino. In his ideal world, Hitler dies on fire in a cinema and L'Enfer gets released.
Yeah, it's like
And so, like, also in Tarantino's fantasy world, a couple of idiots kill the Manson family and Sharon Tate is able to live her life.
Yes. I mean, I'm still not sure about killing the family, because, you're shown the ranch, and there's like, dozens
Yeah,
and
they
dozens
didn't
and
kill all
dozens
of them,
of
but the murders didn't
And-
happen. Is the point?
Well, not yet.
That's the happy ending you get.
Yeah,
I
well,
felt very weird about that final shot, I must say. As much as I enjoyed everything leading up to it, the final shot where they all go into Sharon Tate's house,
yes,
and it's a happy ending, and also it's Leonardo DiCaprio's character's re-entry into Hollywood. It's his thing, it's his career's ending, and now he's making a new friend.
But I didn't read it that way at all. Again, I read it as, my God, he's done 4 films in Italy. They're probably going to be successful. He's just killed these people in his house. The publicity the next day will revitalize his career, right?
True.
And he's now going up to Polanski's house, which he's been hoping will be his big chance, right? That isn't he lucky to live near Polanski? But rendered bittersweet with what of what will happen in that house at some point, yeah, or in reality.
Well, I mean that's sort of the idea, though, isn't it? At the end of this, like it didn't happen. They stopped.
No, I don't read it that way. Because
Really? You read it as it could still happen tomorrow?
Yes, I think, because we know it did, right? I mean, if you wanted something to twist it to that extent, you wouldn't have given her the name Sharon Stone.
Sharon Tate.
Sharon Tate. You would have given her,
Well, maybe, but on the other, but
So
then it does.
we know
but then
what
it does
happened.
also say, Friday, August 8th, 1969, which is the date that happened. I think that's the idea. It is meant to be rewriting it to that extent. It's meant to be saying, in an ideal world. That's why I find that final shot kind of weird, because ultimately this history doesn't change, and these willful murders. And I mentioned to you at one point, I wonder what Roman Polanski thinks
exactly.
of this.
I mean, if that's his intention, then I think it's a failure. Because I mean, I came out of the cinema thinking, oh well, poor Sharon. It's not going to be long before she gets murdered as well, because you see the state of her pregnancy, and you know what happened in real life. So I didn't take it as him rereading, because actually then that's not consistent. He doesn't rewrite everything else about Hollywood. He's very careful to use, real posters, right, of B films, of...
I absolutely agree, and I think that kind of what it comes down to is, this is, like I say, this is inside Tarantino's head. If he could imagine Hollywood, he'd take everything that he loves, which is everything that he faithfully reproduces.
Yes.
You get all of these... The film is a collection of parts of these wonderful pastiches of all types of movies and all types of TV shows. With Leonardo DiCaprio even gets put in the Steve McQueen role, literally edited in The Great Escape.
I know.
It's wonderful. I mean, I've had a fantastic time. So this is like Tarantino going, God, if Hollywood, I love this, but I really don't like that the Manson murders happen. So in my version, they actually, we beat up the bad guys.
Yeah, well...
And bite their balls off.
You may be right. I really didn't read it that way, but, I might have to see it again. And I would be delighted to see it again, actually, because there's so many things that I loved about the film. I think it's Brad Pitt's best role ever, right? He's just kind of extraordinary, and he plays it on all of these different levels, with kind of a minimum of gesture and so on, and a huge amount of confidence. He's kind of a joy to watch. And DiCaprio is phenomenal, really, because actually he's playing somebody who's dumb, who's vain, who's kind, who's not too bright.
Yeah, he's got
every facet, right? And actually, his imitation of B-movie acting or bad television genre acting is just incredible, because he's doing it so well, and you recognize it. You recognize it as that style of
Yeah.
So he's absolutely kind of extraordinary. Just a bliss to watch, really.
I think this is Tarantino's least self-conscious film. This thought struck me like halfway through. This thought struck me actually during one of the scenes where DiCaprio was playing his Western baddie on TV, and they were playing it through as though it was a real scene. And this thought occurred to me that, like, this is every film, I think, that Tarantino, basically every film he's done, has been Tarantino playing with toys that he likes. But they've always had some degree of self-consciousness, maybe apart from Jackie Brown, which is slightly different to the others. There've always been some degree of, as he kind of intimated, everyone acts like characters from other movies. They don't act like people. Everyone talks with Tarantino's voice, I think. All the shots are cribbed from other movies, that sort of thing. And in this, the fact that it is so on the surface, it's so blatant that's what he's doing, because it's about that. means it's indulgent, but I felt like in the very best way, it's a really enjoyable place to be for so much of it.
Oh, I loved it.
Despite the fact that not kind of an awful lot is happening, the plot doesn't move an awful lot during some of those scenes.
But there's a lot happening in terms of character.
Exactly.
In terms of the friendship between the two men, I think it's wonderful. When I was coming out of the cinema, I was thinking, is this what camp for straight people feels like, right? Because, so on the one hand, I mean, one of the things that he does so well is he cites things in a way that you recognize, and then he shifts it, right? In a way that makes you laugh or surprises you, yeah? But he's kind of working with kind of a recognizable historical memory, like a mediascape of pop culture of things, people recognize. I mean, to me, a lot of it was my childhood, right? Kind of watching Mannix and so on television. But the thing is that, whereas I think camp undercuts, or it always expresses a kind of hurt, or, this is just kind of like, a knowingness, a twist on a joke, yeah? And I don't want to put that down. I don't think that's not nothing. I just think it's something different. But it is a kind of camp, yeah?
Could you elaborate? I'm not quite sure I get what you're going at.
The cigarette advertisement that ends the film.
Right. Red apples. Yeah,
so everybody recognizes it. Everybody's laughing at at the joke of the tobacco, and everybody's laughing about how you don't get the sore throat. There's a series of jokes, right? And you recognize those advertisements. You've seen them, even if it's only on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, they were a staple. But then that last bit where it all ends, and he hits his, and he wraps him. That's an undercutting of all of that. The
cigarette
right?
tastes like shit.
Yeah. And has nobody noticed my double chin, right?
Yeah. So like, if it didn't end with that, it would be too earnest. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, the thing is that he's undercutting, or he's turning the recognizable aspect into a joke, yeah? So it's not only that the actor doesn't believe what he's saying, we all recognize the falsity, those gestures that he does with his face and his voice, right? Like he's moving his head to the camera with this kind of earnestness, right? Everybody recognizes it. And then that eruption of violence, right?
Yeah.
Which is meant to be funny, because it undercuts, that moment that you originally saw. So it does a lot of things that camp does, but it's not quite camp, or at least to me. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting idea, because I did come out thinking, is this what camp for straight people is? Yeah,
it's kind of an interesting idea. Like. I suppose I'm not familiar enough with camp, but I mean, I certainly got the feeling. Maybe this is related. I certainly got the feeling that this is Leonardo DiCaprio especially, but everyone playing dress up.
For sure.
There's a feeling of dress up and playfulness in the whole thing. We're getting to play at being movie stars in the film. Brad Pitt gets to play at being the cool guy stuntman who looks like he does. Even though he does it like he does, he's fucking Brad Pitt. Like, he gets to play that.
Yes, well, I mean, all of the roles in the film are all about performance and performing, and right, like, But actually, I think one of the reasons that the film does work for me is that there are also layers of that. So you have Leonardo DiCaprio as a person who's lonely and needy, and is having problems with alcohol, right? Yeah, and then you have his self-consciousness as an actor, and his realization of his status and his slipping, and then him playing all of these different roles, and him even playing roles that he hadn't gotten, right? So there's all these layers of performance, right? But there's also something. It is layers, because you also see that what's underneath.
It's anchored to a real character.
It's anchored to a real character who feels, and you feel for him.
Yeah.
Right? He's got no one else, in his life except his stuntman, which I understand is based on, the relationship of Burt Reynolds and Hal Needham, who then became a director, but who started off as a stuntman. And in fact, Hal Needham did a whole bunch of films that were just about car chases with Burt Reynolds, and I think Burt Reynolds directed a film which was about stuntmen, which I now forget the title of, but it was kind of And Burt Reynolds also started was in television in that period, so I'm sure there are kind of resonances there actually. Anyway, the film is interesting to me, along with all the other reasons we've mentioned and more than we will mention in a few moments. But because it's a landscape that I'm also engaged with, that is part of my childhood, that has all this lore that surrounds it, right? So one of the things that I found fascinating and also kind of rather touching about Tarantino is how much he loves, those restaurants where, he makes a big point of showing you all the restaurants where, all the stars hang out, right? They're kind of
described in voiceover as well.
Yeah, they're like landmark they're places of dreams, aren't they? Right? And he recreates them all, and the movie posters and the marquees and the films showing in Cinerama, right? The drive-in. I mean, all of that. I loved it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful. It's a really enjoyable, friendly, funny place to hang out when all that stuff's happening. Especially the stuff on set, I think, with Leonardo DiCaprio. That stuff is great. And all the conversations that he has, as you mentioned, the clips of him that you see in previous movies that he's done, that sort of thing. They're joyous, and there's a huge amount of fun in those. There's something. The one thing that interested me, which was a lot of care is taken in those clip bits to really film them and portray them as authentically as possible, to look as authentic as possible. So they're in the right aspect ratio, and they're black and white, and the camera moves are all the same. And like when you see his guest appearance on that FBI, the TV show, like it looks exactly like a 1969 television program.
But not only that, I love their discussion about it.
It's like Mystery Science Theater 3000, and then talking in the background over it.
They're talking in the background, and they're saying, "I love that shot," right? Like when he's being filmed through the broken windshield, right? Yeah.
And when he jumps out the car, Brad Pitt goes, "That's a good leap."
That's a good leap.
But it really is like MST3K. That bit. If you go and watch clips of that, it's exactly the same. Just the voice is chiming in over the top. It's fantastic.
I've never seen that.
It's really indulgent. As I say again, indulgent in the best way.
But one of the things that you see a lot in the film is people watching films and people watching TV.
Yeah.
Right. And there's also a kind of an interesting commentary on TV, right? Like, where one of the Manson people says, well, we've grown up with TV and all we've grown up is like, with killers. So this is how we're going to get vengeance into the culture that has taught us nothing but
kill
killing.
the people who taught us to kill.
Which is a nonsense. But and the film treats it as a kind of a nonsense, right?
It does,
like, because you can see how immersed Tarantino also was, in television. And also the pop music, the soundtrack was again fantastic, right? Which is something that you now expect of him, I suppose.
But just to finish the point I was making about the authenticity of everything they try and build, all the other media they try and build, as it were. You get these two sequences in which DiCaprio is playing this baddie in the Western TV show that he doesn't really want to play, and he's not going to be that recognisable, and it's a bad moment for him in a way. And it's these scenes with I think it's Timothy Olyphant, isn't it? And they play these through. Actually, the second one isn't. Anyway. So they play these through and they are not shot as a 1960s TV show. They're just the film playing.
Yeah, they're filming the filming,
right?
Rather than.
But they're not filming the filming. They are playing as though this were just a real Western film, and like the shot selection is good shot selection. It's like it's storytelling shot selection. It's not saying if we step back for a moment, these are the shots they would pick. It's not like there seems to be a kind of contemporary style to it.
Well, the film works on certain levels, on different levels, so there's the thing, for example, the shootout, right? Or, but then there's also this incredible like self-consciousness, right? The bit in the saloon where he throws up his line, right? The conversation with the little girl as they're waiting like to go on, right?
Yeah.
Kind of so I think there are different things going on that are filmed differently. And that also, DiCaprio is so fantastic because he's playing each of them in a different way, in a different style. So for example, the scene where he breaks down where the girl tells him, "You're the best actor I've ever worked with," and
the best acting I've ever seen.
Yes, and he wells up
like he's accepting an Oscar.
Yes, it's like so stylized. It's brilliant, right? And greatly skilled, I think.
But the way these are shot, there's a real blurring of lines in a way that there isn't in anything else. In everything else, there's absolute distinction about what you're looking at. You can tell from the style of the shot, the colour, the frame, exactly what you're supposed to be looking at. But in these, there isn't. So like the thing is playing through as though it were just a 2019 movie. But you're watching them play through this TV show from 1969. And so, for instance, you have this camera shot where the camera comes around, it tracks around on Timothy Olyphant to end up in a two-shot on Olyphant and DiCaprio. And that's when he fucks up his line. And they go back, and the camera goes back too. So, like, this is the camera that's filming this. But also, like, when it cuts, you don't see the setup from the other one. It's cut as though it's just a regular, It's only the one thing right at the end of the second scene where he's holding the little girl hostage that the camera eventually cuts to. You see the crew director, filming it. So like there's a blurring in there that there isn't in anything else. That I don't think maybe means so much. But it is playful and it contributes to a weird feeling. But it's that feeling of, I think, playfulness and indulgence that the film just wants everything it wants.
I think for me this is his best film since Pulp Fiction, which is very different. And I think the reason why it's his best film is because it's, to me, the film where he's got most to say, right? Like, he's the director, he's somebody who's in love with movies, and he's an actor, and he knows about Hollywood and about careers and about acting and actors and the gradations of stardom and, people's vanities and egos and their feelings. And actually, you do see all of that. It's a very, very rich film, I mean, this is kind of the film where, Tarantino has a lot to say that's kind of worth listening to. He knows about this stuff. I'm not sure, that he knew about any of the other stuff.
No, it's everything else he made is because he has seen movies about that stuff. He likes the movies. And
that's right. Yeah. I think so.
Even Jackie Brown, probably. Which, Jackie Brown is based on,
blaxploitation films.
Well, and a novel by Elmore Leonard, isn't it?
Right.
Which and he was a screenwriter. All these novels got adapted into sort of trashy-ish films.
Can you even remember what The Hateful Eight was about? I mean,
yeah, it was basically The Thing, but with racism.
Yes, I mean, I can't even remember.
I think it had a great tone.
I mean,
but all that stuff about shooting it in 70mm because that's the most beautiful thing. And the thing about breaking the guitar, which was this real old guitar that they smashed up and went, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Like it's you're just trying to make your own cool stories about how you made the film. Isn't that interesting?
I mean, I barely remember it. I barely remember Kill Bill 2. You remember moments of Kill Bill. I remember moments of Django.
Django Unchained.
Yeah, Django Unchained, and not all the moments I remember are good ones. Do
you think this is racist?
Yes. I mean, not in overt, crude way, though.
I think it kind of is kind of overt and crude. I mean, if you look at the characterization of Bruce Lee, for instance,
that's what I was thinking of. I mean, I think what happens is it really expresses white privilege. If you're asking me, like, did Quentin Tarantino want to make a joke about Bruce Lee being Chinese? I would say no. He's making a joke about kind of this conception, that he's an unbeatable fighter, in relation to someone like Muhammad Ali, right? But it ends up looking really racist.
Well, the joke is also, I think, on the image of Bruce Lee. The guy who stands in a stance and goes, "Wah!"
Yes.
Which at one point when they're having the fight, Brad Pitt even does a little "Wah!" to take the piss out of him.
That's true.
The joke is on that too.
All kids of a certain age went, "Wah!"
Yeah, and it's also the kind of you're introduced to Bruce Lee as this grandstanding guy who's talking to all these guys on the set about what Cassius Clay can do and what the difference between martial arts fighting and boxing, and how in martial arts you're not allowed to kill the other guy, but I wish you were, because it's
an off moment in the film.
I think it is.
On the other hand, I do think that the film tries to redeem that by kind of bringing him back into the role that he played in Sharon Stone's success.
Sharon Tate, sorry. Sharon Stone, it'd be a very different film if it was about Sharon Stone. It would all be those like 4 frames where she crosses her legs.
Well, keep correcting me as my names slip. So yeah, but I think kind of So I mean, I'm sure there's a historical basis probably of Bruce Lee having taught Sharon Stone. He I think he taught karate to a whole bunch of people. I think it might even be Steve McQueen as well. He definitely.
I'm sure that side of it is absolutely accurate. It's not the kind of thing that I mean, he loves that sort of stuff, like all those stories. That's what he lives for, Tarantino.
He does, and they're great to see here, except for moments that do seem, that moment does feel racist to me, actually, and the film, I think, is misogynist, I really do.
It's happy to sideline everyone who isn't a white guy, in a way, and make comments about them too. There's comments about the Mexicans.
Yeah, that's right.
That Brad Pitt's character makes.
Yes.
And it's just a comment and it's just a throwaway joke, but the fact is that it's there and you feel it and you feel, what's the point of it?
Well, nobody would accept, those throwaway jokes if they were about Jews.
Maybe.
I think it's very interesting that he always makes those jokes about disenfranchised people. They're always about Mexicans, they're always about blacks, they're always about gays, whatever. Well, he's not making jokes about the Ku Klux Klan, is he? It feels.
Go on.
It feels unpleasant.
Right, it kind of rankled, and I think it's not so much like exactly what the comment is, because the comment about Mexicans is don't cry in front of a Mexican.
Yes.
So he says when DiCaprio's all upset about his career ending at the start, and there's not a lot. I mean, you don't know what the basis of that is. It's just like don't look weak in front of the help. I guess is the idea.
Yeah, that is the idea.
But it's not so much like the exact content of that comment, but it's the way it sidelines the entire group of people, and then we just carry on.
Yeah.
As the 2 cool white guys in the car.
Actually, in a way, that's what makes it worse, right? It's a throwaway joke.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, if it were about if the film kind of were about that sort of thing and interrogate it would be something else. It's not you can't ever do that in a film.
That's a historical problem, I think, with Tarantino, that he feels he can say these things, and he's because other people say them, and kind of not being conscious that other people don't get the budgets that he gets to make the films that he does, that circulate the way that his films do, and that it has, everything is contextual, and actually within his context he can do better, and he needs to do better.
I would have liked to have seen, on a similar line, more context behind the Manson family. It's what you're saying about everything in Tarantino films being superficial is absolutely true of the way the Manson family is treated here.
Yes.
What they believed in, despite the fact that what they believed in was stupid, the idea that this race war was coming. It has the signifiers of what they are. They were dumpster diving. They were living on the ranch. It was just full of women. They were fucking the gold guy who ran the ranch, and then they were told to go and commit these murders. Everything that all those kind of bits that the little details that there, but. Actually, what they represented, the idea that Charles Manson was someone who wanted to be a star, he wanted to be a musician, he kept getting turned down, he was too weird for everyone, he wasn't quite good enough, he would fuck up every opportunity that he had, combined with insanity.
But also the hippie movement that, meant people, were urged to leave their understandings behind and to go for the new, wherever it might, there was a sense of experimentation and so on. And
the feeling of it as well being a kind of signal of the end of the 60s. The 60s, kind of what we were saying in The Matrix about how the 90s ended really suddenly when 9/11 happened. It feels like the 60s ended just as suddenly, and this was a kind of symbol of it. The Manson murders.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I share that.
There's like a perversion of everything that was supposed to be great about the hippie movement.
I always feel, well, certainly in America, kind of, I think the 60s ended with Nixon.
Yeah, sure.
Or something, you know.
But you know, but the point is, there's nothing like that in this.
No.
The Manson family is there so that they can be beaten up at the end.
But in a way, I think that's okay. A film can't be about everything. And actually, I think what this film really is about, well, it's about Hollywood, right? And it's about stardom, and it's about acting. But it's also about the relationship between these two men. It is also about, you know, a film about a male friendship, really. And I really loved it as that, actually.
Yeah, so did I.
And the interplay between, well, actually, you know, Brad Pitt is, I think Leonardo DiCaprio is better. He's doing very complex things acting-wise. He really is acting in these different styles and in these different registers, right? You know, throughout the film. Brad Pitt is doing something simpler, right? But also Brad Pitt achieves more effects. Like, you know, every little thing he does lands, right? You know, he's just kind of beautiful to see, actually. And actually, he is beautiful to see, you know, as well. Like, you know, kind of, he's still incredibly handsome, you know. But I think now you can appreciate his skill as well, right? And, you know, and his skill as a film actor. It is often like, you know, a line reading or a sideways glance or something that lands a joke. He's very, very good.
I think he can play anything. I really do. You know, he'll play an incredibly cool badass in one film, then the next he'll be some fucking idiot in a Coen Brothers movie with silly hair, dancing to music in a car. Remember that bit? Mm-hmm. You know, like, and then he can do this in here where, you know, he's incredibly cool just to look at. Like, he has that sort of James Dean sort of stance look. Actually, it was rather like in Benjamin Button, when he got to sort of 29 years old in that film, when he aged down to 29, he the idea was he looked like fucking Marlon Brando, you know, on a bike, you know, and he has a similar sort of look here. They allow him to have that really cool look when he's striding through the ranch. I'm thinking, you know, just not intimidated by anyone, totally in control, doesn't matter. And then, you know, he gets high at the end. He trips on an acid cigarette,
Yes.
and then he just starts like looking at his hand, and you know, as a fucking idiot, he's fantastic too.
Yeah,
he gets all these great, brilliant effects.
Yes, he is very good, but I do think that DiCaprio is on a completely different level. The thing about Brad Pitt is he can do natural, you know, but he can't do stylized. He can't do farce. Whereas actually in this film, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio is doing all of those things. Yeah. You know, so I mean, I'm not putting Brad Pitt down. I think he's phenomenal in this, right? But in terms of, you know, the acting required, DiCaprio has a much juicier role, and he lives up to it.
Yeah.
You know? I loved all of that, actually, and I loved that it's a Hollywood film. I loved stupid things like, you know, just seeing the posters for Funny Girl on the Lot, you know, kind of the posters that he has, the way that, like, you know, when he's pictured, his famous picture, he's pictured in Mad Magazine, right? Like, yeah, all of that stuff. I just love that. Actually, I want to see it again.
All those fake posters of the movies that he's been in, and the Italian movies with names like Shoot the Gringo, Ringo. Whatever it is.
Yes, those Spanish-Italian kind of spaghetti westerns. I loved all of that, actually.
And it's a kind of portrait of the ending of a certain kind of Hollywood masculinity. You know, like what he represents, that kind of Burt Reynolds thing, as you're saying, is ending at this point, you know.
Yes.
Or it's having to change, at least. Hollywood is changing.
Yes. I mean, this is the period where all of a sudden the leading men, the big Hollywood stars, are Pacino, who's brilliant in this, Elliot Gould, Dustin Hoffman, right? Kind of people who are unimaginable as stars in 60s films. Except maybe Walter Matthau, really. You know, yeah. So there's a new... But Walter Matthau's stardom is also in this period. You know, it's like from 66 onwards, right? So the end of the 60s is a period of change, really. And actually, you know, Peter Fonda just died, so it's also worth mentioning that Easy Rider was a kind of a marker of those changes, really. It came out, I think, in 69, You know, the year that this is set, it was a phenomenal kind of hit. It meant that studio heads were then banking on young people, really, who were their audience.
Yeah,
you know, so.
And Peter Fonda and like Peter Fonda was kind of a dropout, wasn't he? Like he wasn't really considered good or reliable professional, and Dennis Hopper was
I think
a wild man.
Yeah, I think Dennis Hopper was different. I think, Peter Fonda was like a star of B movies, really, for what was it, American, the B film studio, really. What's his name? The producer, Corman.
Roger Corman.
Yeah. You know, and then he must have been responsible because he directed and so on. You know, so he had a career as a director subsequently, but certainly, you know, as a star, he didn't last for very long. His career didn't last for very long. But this film, Easy Rider, did signal all of the changes, really. So it was kind of like a turning point.
When was Bonnie and Clyde? That's 1967.
Yeah, that's 1967. But, you know, Bonnie and Clyde had, you know, Warren Beatty, really, you know, and Faye Dunaway. You know, though maybe the film helped make Faye Dunaway, whereas, you know, Warren Beatty was already, you know, the young leading man of the period. But, you know, Easy Rider, it was also where Jack Nicholson got really noticed, right? He was nominated for an Academy Award for that, right?
He was another one who was in Corman films, wasn't he?
He was in Corman films as well. But, you know, that year in 1969, I think he was in... My God, my mind is going that... He had a tiny role in a Barbra Streisand film, a big musical directed by Vincente Minnelli, which I now forget the name. You know, but that was like a tiny part. And then he got, you know, nominated for an Academy Award for what was meant to be this really low-budget independent film. So kind of, you know... And from then on, he had hit after hit after hit, right? I mean, you know, I always associate kind of Nicholson with the 70s because, you know, Five Easy Pieces and Chinatown and the film where he's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Yeah, it was kind of hit after hit after hit. The film where he's a sailor on leave, which I now forget the name.
It's the Streisand film you're thinking of, On a Clear Day You Can See Forever.
That's right.
1970.
Well, they were released the same season. I mean,
yeah.
You know,
No, I'm just saying.
Anyway, where were we in relation to Once Upon a Time in the West
Well,
in
we
Hollywood?
were just talking about like the end of the 60s, the end of a kind of masculinity or a certain type. The end. It's like, you know, it's like fucking Woody in Toy Story. Like the first Toy Story is like, you know, it doesn't have the spaceman coming in, but it's like the threat of the end of who I am and what I represent and what I am. You know, so when he's seen Rick, this is the DiCaprio character, when he has a shout at the Manson family when they're pulling up on his drive. You know, when they go out, they're like, wasn't that Rick Thingy who was in that TV show from years back? And then they start reminiscing about, oh, that was my favourite program.
Yes.
You know, like in the 50s. You know, when you could be a cowboy and that was cool. And that was the biggest thing.
But of course, you know, in the 50s, they would have been 10 years old or 12 years old as opposed to now being 20 or 22 or, But anyway, I want to bring something up because, you know, the very title of the film brings up comparisons with Once Upon a Time in the West and Once Upon a Time in America.
Yes.
Where would you...
By what's his name?
By Sergio Leone.
That's the one. I haven't seen Once Upon a Time in America. I've seen Once Upon a Time in the West, which is fabulous.
How would you compare this to...
How can you compare them? They're not the... You know, it's but I mean, you're right that it invites those comparisons.
It really does.
This film is supposed to be all-encompassing. This is a tale about... It's a fable about this world, but... Oof.
I think Once Upon a Time in America is a masterpiece. You know, and I think there are some shots in that where you just go like, wow, right? And also it's very beautiful and it's very touching. It's very violent. You know, and I just think this doesn't compare. Like, I loved it, but it doesn't compare.
But I mean, how, like, apart from the titles, where do you think the comparison is? You know.
Well, the comparison is that each of those films is trying to tell you something about a structure of feeling. Yeah, not so much an era. Maybe an era mediatized or something, right? But it is set in particular epochs, right? Like Once Upon a Time in the West, Once Upon a Time in America is about immigrants kind of, coming to New York. I think it's set in the 20s, 30s, and it's about gangsters, it's kind of about Jewish gangsters. It's about the immigrant experience, right? It's really incredibly beautiful. Kind of, and I think it's one of the great films. Like, I only caught it on television, actually. I wasn't able to see it when it came out, which was maybe the 70s. I forget when it is, but anyway, I saw it on television, and it was like at midnight. I just could not stop watching. I was like completely riveted, really, and just gobsmacked by kind of some of the shots, some of the imagery. It was so
1984.
1984.
So yeah, later than we thought. Once Upon a Time in the West was 68.
Yeah. I'm not surprised, actually, there was one in 1984. I did think it was like late 70s, early 80s, something like that.
3 hours and 49 minutes.
Yes. I think the version that was released, and it got very bad reviews, and I think it was balderized. And anyway, I just didn't go see it for whatever reason, maybe because of all of that. But I did catch it on television recently, the restored version, and it was amazing. And I just think this film is not on that level.
Leone originally envisaged 2 3-hour films, then a single 4 hour and 29 minute film, but was convinced by distributors to shorten it to 3 hours and 49 minutes. The American distributors, the Ladd Company, further shortened it to 139 minutes, which is 2 hours and 19 minutes.
Yeah, which is like cut it in half, basically.
Yeah, that's and rearranged the scenes into chronological order without Leone's involvement. The shortened version was a critical and commercial flop in the US, and critics who had seen both versions harshly condemned the changes. The original European cut, quote unquote, has remained a critical favourite, and so on and so forth. I haven't seen it, I must.
Yeah, you must. It's beautiful. I hope I'm not romanticizing, but I did see it not long ago. I mean, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe even 5. But anyway, every time it comes on, I always watch it. It really is entrancing. Just the shots, the composition of the shots, the way it looks, right? Like, you watch a few minutes and you want to kind of,
Do you think if this comes on, you'll watch it?
Oh, I definitely will. Yeah. I mean, I think it's great, and it's great fun, and, it's much, much better than expected. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I am not a Tarantino fan. And this is, I think, one of his very best works. And as I said, I think partly it's because it's not only a love letter to Hollywood, which it is, and it's a love letter to his childhood, really, to his appreciation of that pop culture of the era. But I also do think that it's material that he's familiar with and that he knows about and that he has feelings for. And I think that all of that is transmitted.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it works especially well with somebody like me, who I'm a year older than he is, and I grew up with the same kind of pop culture.
I really got the feeling, and this thought popped into my head while I was watching it, that it's like when you have a teacher who is really, really interested in the subject that they teach, and that their enthusiasm for it and knowledge about it gets transmitted to you, and makes you as excited as they are. This has that feeling.
Yeah, I felt that. When the characters are showing an appreciation of shots. Yes. Yeah. Kind of, it's kind of, wow, it's good, I kind of,
Yeah. But it's that kind of, but it has that behind the scenes thing of, getting ready for the scene and in makeup, blah, blah, all the rest of it, the filmmaking stuff, but then it really indulges in the playing of it.
Yes. And also, what not very good actors suffer through in order to give you that performance, right? Like, I thought those scenes with DiCaprio berating himself, for having drank the night before and ruining his performance, and it's like so sweet and endearing and charming, right? Because then he really is just quite a bad TV actor with all of those mannerisms,
I thought he was good, when the little girl said that was the best acting I've ever seen. I agreed with her. I thought it was great. I mean, honestly, like it is obviously a pastiche of that bad acting, but I suppose it's within a context that you know that's what he's doing.
Yes.
But then, like, so then I suppose I'm going, but he does it so well.
Oh yeah.
He does the bad acting so well.
Oh yeah, I know.
You know what I mean? Like how Hugh Grant has like made a little cottage industry of playing failed stars now.
Yes.
You know, and he's wonderful at it, and he really endears you to him.
Yes.
Similar sort of thing in this. He does the
Yes.
bad stuff really beautifully.
Again, I think DiCaprio's in a class of his own. I really do. I mean, I thought he was like such a fantastic Gatsby, you know. And I mean, he's one of those extraordinary stars, of which actually you know very little about, really, you know. But I mean, I think it's almost over a decade since he's been in hit after hit after hit after hit.
DiCaprio.
Yeah, like huge hits, right? I mean, I think the last film that I remember where it wasn't a big hit was Blood Diamonds, you know.
I like Blood Diamond.
Read his filmography since either Romeo or Juliet or Titanic, right? They were both huge successes. One, a landmark sociological, you know, phenomenon. But actually, his Romeo and Juliet did over 100 million when at the time that was considered a blockbuster success. So, you know, what has he done since those?
Since Romeo and Juliet and Titanic,
Yeah.
which were 96 and 97. He did The Man in the Iron Mask, Celebrity.
Okay, Man in the Iron Mask hit. Celebrity was a Woody Allen film. He's fabulous in that.
Was The Man in the Iron Mask a hit?
Yes, it was.
It certainly was. The Beach.
That was a hit, though not very well received.
Catch Me If You Can, which is
Blockbuster
great.
hit. That did over 100 million.
You still haven't seen it, have you?
Well, I
It's
don't...
so good, man.
Okay, well, I'll give it another go. But
if you like Dear Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you know, it's got similar things going on. It's got that playfulness. It's got that evocation of an era.
Keep going.
You know, wonderful.
So far, all hits.
Gangs of New York.
Oh, that was a hit, yes.
The Aviator.
Yes.
The Departed.
Yes.
Blood Diamond.
Okay, so you see, the other three all did over 100 million. And then I think Blood Diamond maybe didn't. It was certainly less of a success than the others.
I'll double check for you. Blood Diamond cost 100 million, made 171.
Yeah, so...
Sold on the basis of him.
Sure.
So, you know, The 11th Hour.
I don't know.
That's a documentary he co-wrote and narrated. I don't know. Yeah. Body of Lies, Ridley Scott.
That might have been a flop, actually. I don't remember that at all.
Check. Made 118 million on a 70 million budget. Not really.
So didn't make its money back.
Revolutionary Road. That's the one where they he did it with Kate Winslet again.
Well, that got good reviews, and you know,
It made twice its budget.
He was nominated for an Oscar, so.
Was he? I know Michael Shannon was for like 10 minutes.
Maybe Michael Shannon and Kate Winslet were, and he wasn't.
No, just Michael Shannon. Also art direction and costume design. But
right, okay.
no, only Michael Shannon for acting. That was the one where people said, I haven't seen it, but this is the one where people said if they'd survived at the end of Titanic, this would be their life now. They would be this fucking boring. Shutter Island.
He's wonderful. Shutter Island hit. And brilliant, I think.
It's quite good. I've got problems with it. Yeah, huge hit. $300 million. Now, the problem I have with it, right, this is a spoiler for Shutter Island if you haven't seen it, but he plays this bloke called Teddy Daniels, right? And he's this cop investigating this mental asylum on Ireland, and it turns out that he's actually a patient there, and like they allow him to make up this scenario about himself. And you've got Ben Kingsley at the end, who he runs the place. He gets this fucking chalkboard out and he says, you see, your real name is Andrew Ladis. And Teddy Daniels is an anagram of Andrew Ladis, and he has it on a chalkboard. And like, that's the wrong way around, right? You don't have a name like Andrew Ladis that just happens to make an anagram of Teddy Daniels that you can use in your fantasy. You have the name Teddy Daniels, and then you have to make up a shit name like Andrew Ladis to make the thing work. It's fucked up. I have a huge problem with that.
What came after that?
Hubble, he narrated. Inception. Beyond
Huge
massive hit.
Yeah.
2010. J. Edgar. I don't know if
that was not a
hit,
big hit.
but it was Oscar nominated and all the rest. It was it was a Clint Eastwood, very respectable, shallow focus film.
Yes.
Made twice its budget, more than. Django.
Big hit.
Great Gatsby.
Big hit.
Wolf of Wall Street.
Big hit.
The Revenant. He got an Oscar.
Big hit. Yeah, it was.
He got an Oscar because he got
and
raped by a bear.
it was a big hit. So you see,
and then it's since then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
So you see, there isn't a star of his age who's got anywhere near that track record. Really, it is blockbuster hit after blockbuster hit, not in franchises. That's the other thing, you know.
Yeah, no, he hasn't been subsumed by the MCU behemoth yet.
Or the Fast and the Furious, or you know.
Imagine.
He hasn't done.
I don't know. Imagine though.
Well, I would love to see him do like an action film like that. Actually, I would.
Did you read that article I sent you about how Jason Statham and The Rock are just absolute pansies, and how they have to make sure that they get the same number of hits in on each other in the fights?
Yes.
And like when one of them gets thrown through a glass window, the other has to get thrown through a glass window 5 seconds later.
I did read that.
And this is what I was saying about those being producers' films. Like, oh, I'm so protective of my image.
Well, I did read that, and I found it fascinating because, you know, The Rock is the bigger star. Dwayne Johnson is the bigger star, you know. But I do think that Statham is like the preeminent action star of the last decade, really. And yet I think that's signified, or that's proven, by the fact that they both had equal say in how many times each would be punched, you know, and how that might affect their image, right? So, though Dwayne Johnson got more money because he's also in comedies and he is the bigger international star, but, you know, kind of Jason Statham's star power is such that he could demand things being equal.
Interestingly, though, he's also a huge star in this particular series. Like, it's not like he's a second fiddle in that respect. This is kind of, I think, as much his series as it is The Rock's.
Yeah.
But there's something interesting, because we had this conversation the other day about Statham being the biggest British star and being very working class compared to everyone else, notable, which is, you know, you're bringing up. One of our listeners, Ben, on Twitter, really interestingly brought up Liam Neeson, who's Northern Irish.
Exactly.
Who's obviously
who's
massive.
Also, an action star.
Who's also an action star and is obviously massive. But he's from Northern Ireland, and I think it points out something that I didn't pick up on when we were having that conversation, which is that there's a lot of assumed Englishness in what we were talking about. Yes. You know, because what happened was you were comparing Statham in particular to the kind of Eton set of actors, who all have very privileged upbringings, went to private schools, went to Eton, went to good universities, and all the rest, and
who are the dominant group of British stars of this generation.
And in comparing them to Statham, I think there's an awful lot of assumed Englishness in that. Yeah. Like I think they both represent different kinds of Englishness, not just Britishness. Which is why I think Liam Neeson didn't come to mind.
Yes, it's
because
true.
He's so massive, but he's not English.
Yes,
and that's something else.
It's true. Yeah, that's a very good point. Anyway, let's go back to Once Upon a Time in the Hollywood and maybe wrap it up.
Well, I mean, I'll always look forward to a new Tarantino film because I think they just always excite me at the cinema, you know, and this didn't let me down, despite the fact that there are these niggles about how does it represent people, what does it assume, you know, and what happens with that ending, that really wonky to me sort of final shot where you go, oh, this was real though, like how fantasy can we make this? It's not the same when it's Nazis, you know. I had a similar thing when I wrote about 12 Years a Slave. It was the first blog I ever did, and I wrote about how like that film seemed to provide a grounding of realism or seriousness for a depiction of slavery that was missing, and that actually would have benefited Django Unchained, because Django Unchained was like the fun version of slavery, like what if we get our own back version of slavery, rather like Inglourious Basterds is the what if we get our own back version of the Nazi story, you know. But the thing is, the Nazis are just everywhere in media. You understand all their symbols, you understand what they're supposed to represent and everything. Like it seemed like Django was kind of being made in a world which that needed to be there for slavery somehow. But you described slavery as the kind of structuring absence of American cinema, like something it didn't want to deal with ever.
Well,
other than through these basic symbols.
I think that's true. But by structuring, it means it's also everywhere in American cinema, but in ways that are unspoken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can't remember. I just went off on one there, but the point is, I really like this, despite niggles.
Well, I think this is the film of his. I think it's his best film since Pulp Fiction, and the one that I've enjoyed the most since Reservoir Dogs. Because I had more fun at this than at Pulp Fiction as well. So I highly recommend.
I think it's a massive amount of fun. I still think Tarantino's best film is Jackie Brown.
Which you may be right, actually.
We were talking in the restaurant before. I think that Jackie Brown is one of the great films of the 90s. I just can't get past that.
I think Pulp Fiction is. It's interesting. I don't know. I can't really comment because I don't think I've seen Jackie Brown since it came out. And I remember liking it very much. But I mean, again, the opposite of the Leones, both of them, in fact, but particularly Once Upon a Time in America, where I'm just drawn to see it. Right? It's just kind of, if it's on, or even I think it's been on Netflix or something like that. I just it's almost like I have to see it. I don't feel that way about Jackie Brown. Like, I haven't had any curiosity to see it since it came out.
Well, you should have some because it's really good.
All right.
It's funny because it's funny just because the other thing I was saying to you before in the restaurant was that I think that Tarantino is the only person who gives Samuel L. Jackson real roles these days. I think everyone else makes him play Sam Jackson or just wants him to play Sam Jackson, the cool guy that you kind of the stereotype of Sam Jackson you expect. Whereas like Steven in Django Unchained, you should have got the best supporting actor Oscar for. It's such a wonderful performance and wonderful role. But in Jackie Brown, that is like peak cool guy Samuel L. Jackson.
Yes.
That's where it all seemed to start almost. That and Pulp Fiction.
Yes.
But then Tarantino's the only one who actually gave him something else to do since.
Yes. Though I think blame Samuel L. Jackson for that. I mean, he's a big star. He's got a lot of choice. He's picking these films.
Yeah, maybe the case.
So
well, anyway.
Yeah.
Fun movie.
Yeah.
Didn't feel like 2.5 hours.
No, it didn't at all. Actually,
it flew.
I thought. So as I was experiencing the film, because I'd been told it was so long, I actually expected another hour. So I thought, okay, we've now seen the ending of the not Sharon Tate Manson murder, and then there'll be another hour about... Yeah.
I was expecting more after that. I didn't expect the film to end there. And then when it goes into that crane shot, you go, oh, this feels like an ending now.
Yeah. But actually, that's a compliment to the film, because it meant that, for me anyway, the 2 hours, whatever it is, flew by.
Yeah, I was ready for more.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies. And if you if you write us a comment, write us a tweet with a correction or anything we've said, then we'll read it out like I did just now.
Yes.
And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Bye bye. It's the day after. We've just seen Animals. I've seen Lion King.
I've seen Lion King.
But online on Facebook, on Twitter and things, the conversation about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has been going on, and it's been on my mind all night.
Okay.
And then all day.
So tell us, what's been on your mind?
Well, something that was pointed out by Lee, who's been on the podcast before, is how the film seemed to directly have a direct relationship or directly respond to the Me Too movement of the last few years. Which didn't really occur to me at the time. I noticed kind of certain things, and we talked a little bit about its sexual politics and sexual representations.
Yes, we talked about how it's a sexist film, but we didn't talk about it in relation to it as a response to Me Too.
Nor did we talk about it in much detail. So we kind of talked about the female characters being very subsidiary, being kind of responses or kind of feeding into the male characters or just kind of comic relief in the case of, for instance, the Italian wife.
Right. Or how they were beaten up at the bar and how that was perceived as funny.
Right.
And how that could be seen as equal opportunity.
But one thing, which you loved, one thing though to consider is that this is Tarantino's first post-Weinstein film.
Yes.
Weinstein was obviously right at the centre of Me Too, kind of.
Yes.
Really kicked it off in a way.
And really, the company was almost like built around Tarantino in many respects. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was their most successful director and the one who was most allied to them.
It was the house that Quentin built.
Yes.
As I think it was put in Peter Biskin's book.
Okay.
And there are one or two moments that then, kind of come to mind. So the one that probably comes to mind most readily is where Brad Pitt picks up the hitchhiker, Princess or whatever her name is, one of the Manson girls, who he's seen a couple of times before. Eventually they're going the right direction, he picks her up, and she offers to suck his cock while he's driving her to the Spawn Ranch. And he asks for ID. How old are you? Clearly you're not old enough. No, I need to see some ID. And it's played as a kind of light-hearted thing.
Yes, he's clearly attracted to her. She's doing all the coming on to him, and then, there's this thing of ID. And it's very cleverly done because he said, I've only been in jail once or, but they've never got me or they've never got me or something like that,
If I ever go back, if they ever catch me again, it's not going to be because of Poontang.
Yeah.
Basically, I think it says Poontang.
I don't remember the exact language.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's what is also interesting is that he doesn't at all. It's not about the morality of having sex with a minor. It's about getting caught. I'm not getting caught for it.
Well,
that's why he laughs it off.
I don't know. I mean, I do think there is something about the law and the breaking of the law and the repercussions of the law, right? So, and it also has to do, I think, a bit with this thing, that kind of people are not exactly recognizable, age-wise, right? Like, I mean, you don't know kind of, well, you do know what age I am because I've told you many times, but, kind of, you look at people and they might be 25, they might be 28 or whatever, right? Like, sometimes you look at somebody who's 18 and they might be 23 and they might be like 15 or so. Yeah, you don't know.
It's a very enlightened perspective though for 1969.
Yes. Yeah. It is.
It's a 2019 perspective.
Yes, I would. Though mind you, I think even if you read on the period, sleeping with underage people is always seen as wrong, as a kind of, a dark fetish or something. It's never been seen as right.
No, I suppose not, but it's the kind of thing that's always been kept as open secrets. That sort of thing.
Not so. I mean, it's often been highly publicized. For example,
Wyman.
Chaplin, right? Like, was very much into underage girls. But it's always been seen as a stain on character, as a bad thing to do.
It's one of those things that I remember when Orson Welles was on Parkinson. He talked about reading someone's book on Hollywood and how after reading this book years later, because this was in the 1970s, he looked back on Hollywood and realised that town. The quote is something along the lines of, "That town has hurt people, and it is bad."
Well, it is, but I mean, I think it's so interesting as well, right? Like that whole thing, because I mean, there was a period where I was very interested in writing about novels about Hollywood, right? Because there was a whole strand of novels in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that dealt about making it, and when they were about men, they were about starting in the mailroom and being so completely ruthless that you made it to the top, right? And the female equivalent of ruthlessness was actually kind of sleeping their way to the top and being like really Machiavellian about, who they slept with and why, right? So, this idea, I mean, so much of Hollywood is about power and desire and being desirable, right? That it's kind of like, in a way, a toxic cocktail. I mean, I think in a way, these the rules that are followed in Hollywood in relation to these matters are so completely different than the ones that apply everywhere else, in a way, right? Because one's desirability is such a commodity in a place where, you know, an actor or is themselves are a commodity, yeah, kind of, you know. So, and mind you, it's always gendered and it's always sexist. So, you know, a man sleeping their way to the top is kind of seen as being smart. You know, a woman sleeping their way to the top is seen as being sluttish. You know, but you never get narratives of sleeping their way to the top in Iowa.
I'm
sure there are.
The best corn farmer. Yeah. The other scene that really came to mind for me, which I'd completely forgotten about, really. Well, there's this whole thing about Brad Pitt's character. Like, one of the central things about his character is this scuttlebutt that he killed his wife and got away with it.
Yes.
And you are shown that up to a point in a flashback. What you're shown is on a boat with his wife. His wife is portrayed basically as a scream. I mean, Tarantino's kind of idea of marriage in this film is not a positive one, because Brad Pitt's marriage is, well, you've got, I suppose, to be fair, you've got Sharon Tate and Polanski's marriage, which you don't see very much of, but it's clearly very happy. But Brad Pitt's marriage to his wife is, for the short time you see it, is portrayed as him putting up with a shrieking harpy who's going on at him, and the way that the accident, or the way that her death is nearly portrayed, because it cuts before it, is that on this boat he's got it must be like a harpoon gun, something along them lines, and she's screeching away, lying down on a deck chair. He takes a seat and she kind of stands up in front of him, and it's just sort of sitting on his lap. And the reading I took from that is that, you know, it was meant to be a joke then, that the camera cuts and you know that he killed her because she was being annoying. To me, I read that as a joke intentionally. I think, though, it's also possible to read it as maybe it's leaving room for the death having been an accident.
I kind of read it as both, yeah?
Yeah.
That the film makes a joke of what was an accident.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I definitely read it as if it was a joke, it would mean that it had to be deliberate, because the joke would be that he would kill her for being that annoying, and he would kill her so casually. That's how he sits down.
No, I mean, you could also have the joke of it being an accident, you know.
Possibly. And then the other side of marriage that the film shows is the marriage to the Italian wife that DiCaprio's character picks up at the end, who, for the very short time you see her, she's basically someone who is responsible for bringing a lot of baggage. I mean, literally all the shopping and stuff and all their stuff. And then, kind of immediately being someone who he's just responsible for, you know? Rather than she certainly doesn't seem to be an equal in that relationship.
No. I mean, the film is, in every way, about men, and women are on the margins of the whole action. There's no question about it. However, that said, I actually don't have a problem with that. You know, I always think that the problem is often displaced. I mean, I think that the real problem is women are not being allowed to make movies. You know, and I think kind of women should make half of the movies that we see, right? And those movies, should be supported. It would teach us all to look differently, right? I mean, you know, I personally don't blame Tarantino for making boys' films, which is what he makes.
Yeah.
You know,
for sure.
So it's true that it has that offhanded. His films have that offhanded sexism, and they also have that offhanded racism. Actually, you know, and I think that you know, there are two faults about the film, because I think even a man who makes boys' films could deal with these situations differently. So, you know, I don't want to excuse him for that. But on the other hand, I think, you know, the film, I think the films also have a kind of a freshness and a precision. Yeah, they're acute about the perspective that they are representing, you know, which I value. And I think you can't do that without being free to do that. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
You know, and the price of that is that you're often very crude or tone deaf about other things, perhaps, you know.
Mm.
Or maybe, you know, you could argue it differently, I suppose, and you could say, well, these are his limitations as an artist, you know, that he does these things well, but actually he can't, you know, he'll never be a great artist because he can't see perspectives other than his own.
Yeah. Mm.
I mean, that would also be an argument one could make.
Yeah. He certainly doesn't seem to be able to. Yeah.
But he hasn't so far.
You get a kind of singular vision from all these films of kind of what life could be. Maybe with the exception of Jackie Brown, which I always come back to as the one exception.
Well, actually, the thing is that I think this is his most personal film.
Yeah, I'm thinking, yeah.
You know, and to me, I think it's his best film because it's his most personal film. So, I mean, I don't disagree that there are problems and there are limitations, right? And maybe, you know, I think it is a limitation for an artist not to be able to understand, you know, perspectives other than his own. Yeah, to not have the imagination to see how other people can hurt or what other people's experiences might be. So, you know, I think those might be his limitations as an artist. But I do think that this one, even with the sexism and the racism, it's his most personal film. It's the one that he knows most about, you know, and that he knows most thoroughly, and that he dramatizes and visualizes, you know, with kind of great acuity.
The other thing that's been on my mind sort of all day is things that I kind of described as niggles yesterday. The kind of issues of representation and how the film, you described it as not questioning white privilege or something along those lines. You know, it's kind of we kind of agreed that it doesn't have a problem not questioning these people's place and that sort of thing. But the more I think about it, the more that becomes actually exacerbated in my head, and it's not just that he doesn't have a problem with that, but actually I think it's deeply conservative, actually, and afraid of change. It depicts a time in Hollywood when things were changing, and it doesn't like it, and it's very protective of what it thinks was lost. I mean, I suppose in a sense that's kind of what nostalgia is. You hear similar things coming out of Brexit voters' mouths all the time about going back to the way things were and that sort of thing. I think it in a sense that's shared here with what Tarantino clearly really values, these kind of archetypes, the DiCaprio type in particular. Ending up, he gives him a happy ending. He gives him a way back into Hollywood at the end. And the thing is, like, the DiCaprio's character hates hippies, and everything that hippies kind of represent is devalued. But I think largely because actually they're only represented by the Manson hippies.
Well, that's right. I mean, that is also...
Like, a reasonable hippie does not really show up in the film.
No, or a political hippie, or, a hippie with a critique of society, or a hippie as, as a metaphor for another way of leading, a good life, right? Or a hippie as an environmentalist, or a hippie as like a health nut, right? Like, hippies kind of conveyed all kinds of, very positive ideas of social change, right? So, but no, he's not interested in that. And actually, I don't want to go on about it because I've always been a great defender of popular culture, right? Yeah, and I've argued that, popular culture can be just as great as high culture in all kinds of ways, and in its own way, right? But I think there is a difference between valor, it's a thing about discrimination and distinctions, which I think are important, right? Because I think it's one thing to value popular culture, and it's another thing to just value popular culture because it's popular, right? Or because it's trash. I mean, the thing about Tarantino is, he's a great lover of trash. I mean, kind of all the posters that dot his films, none of them are like any of the great masterpieces of the cinema. And he's not even interested in arguing that they are neglected great masterpieces of the cinema.
Yeah.
He just loves this trashiness, right?
Yeah.
And actually I think that there is something dulling about just loving trash for itself. Yeah, that actually it
even,
means
even knowing it's trash.
Well, there was this idea in the 1950s about self-cultivation, right, and taste, that actually what you read had an effect on you, right, and that you cultivated your taste, you developed it, you made it richer, you led yourself from reading Harold Robbins to reading Dostoevsky, right, and that Dostoevsky was a goal because, you know, his language, his analysis, his view of people and society were so much richer and more complex than Harold Robbins, right? Right. But I think, you know, that in many ways Tarantino has always remained in the Harold Robbins realm of trash movies.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that also it does dampen one's analysis, one's sensibility, one's sensitivity to things.
Yeah.
Which might also help to account for particular perspectives in this film.
And the other thing that I kind of think about the way the Manson family is handled in the film, which I think I kind of said the first time, but I think right more forcefully, is that you would think that this film, being a kind of a story about Hollywood in the 1960s, about these types, about things changing, all the rest of it, and concentrating on this story that is so central to Hollywood mythology, you would think that it would actually be interested in who Manson was and what he thought and what he stood for, because he was someone who he didn't want to be in Hollywood exactly, but he wanted to be a musician. You know, he ended up writing basically a Beach Boys song. He got in with the Beach Boys, got in with, was it Donald Wilson, the brother? He ended up kind of getting in with them, with him at least, and there's this whole thing about him searching for stardom, his ambition, and he's wanting to be in with the crowd and all that sort of thing. It basically, you would imagine that this is absolutely perfect, kind of thematically, for the film to talk about. And the fact that the film has absolutely no interest in any of that and just wants to use Manson, the Manson family, for the iconography, the imagery, the idea of the murders, is thoroughly disappointing, actually.
I didn't find it so. I mean, I didn't find it so. I mean, there are many things to explore in the Manson murder. One is the question of class, because I think part of the argument, or it could just be my understanding, but my idea is that he went to the murder, or there's certainly gossip about him having gone to Cielo Drive because he thought it was Melcher and Candice Bergen.
Yeah, no,
right?
he thought Terry Melcher there, who was a producer.
Who was a record producer, who was the son of Doris Day, right? And at the time, he was living in Cielo Drive with Candice Bergen, you know, who was also the daughter of one of the top radio shows of the 1940s. So there are two children who are not only celebrated and powerful themselves, but who are also the sons and daughters of Hollywood royalty. So I think there's, you know, one could explore a class dimension to that story, you know, as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, one has to draw the line at saying the film should have been this, the film should have been that, the film should have been, you know, because the film actually could have been many things. But what you have to deal with is what the film is. And I think it really works.
I appreciate that. But it does feel like such an obvious place for it to have gone, and it feels questionable that it didn't.
Well, I don't know.
Why wasn't it interested in...
because the film has a whole other narrative on stardom, on celebrity, on television, on the movies, on aging, on success. I mean, I think it's very rich. I think it's a very rich film.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be happy with that, though. To be honest, it seems so fucking obvious and right there for it. And you know, it's the fact that it's there. The Manson thing is there, but only for its infamous...
It's a spur to something else.
Not even a spur.
It's not about the Manson murder. The film is not about the Manson murder.
No, I know, but that's kind of what I'm saying. Like,
but why should it be about the Manson murder?
Because I just explained why. Because it's so clearly involved. It's like that is what his story was.
No, I don't think that's what his story is. The story is about the friendship between two men. That's the story. One who's, you know, a former TV star on the rocks, and the other one who was a stuntman on the rocks, right? And actually, there's something there which is very interesting because, one is dependent, right? But they're both kind of equal. So, and they're both living in this, Hollywood, in the late 60s, in which their own heyday was, in 1950s television. That's what the story's about.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean that. I meant what Manson's story is about.
Yeah, but this is not Manson's story. It's not.
No,
it's not
but the point
Manson.
is, if you're putting him in the film, if you're putting him and his people in the film,
but why can't you put him in the film?
No, I didn't say you can't. I'm saying wasn't it interested in him? That's my point.
Because it's interested in the Leonardo DiCaprio character and his relationship.
Well, I've made my point now, so
Well, you've made your point, but actually, I think that's the point that people, not just you, but other people have wanted, because they've heard that it's about Manson, and it's not. Then they complain that it's not about Manson. But it's not about Manson.
At no point did I think it was a Manson movie. I always knew that was a side aspect to it. But the fact that then what the film is actually about seems to match so perfectly with elements of the Manson story, and you're going to have him in there, or have his story.
He's on the background. You see him for 2 minutes.
Why? But the fact that you don't draw any thematic link, the fact you don't draw anything out of that's ridiculous to me.
Well, it's not to me. I mean, I think basically Tarantino wanted to make a film about this period in Hollywood history, in which actually television is very important and it's changing. And television is everyone's life, right? And kind of, and the importance of movies is shifting. And he's wanting to deal with, like, B movie culture and celebrity culture and, the way that television kind of fits into that, in a kind of a changing world. And really the Manson thing is just a kind of a little spur to a minor plot point, really. So, why everyone is insisting on wrapping this in the Manson murders is...
Well, I've made my point. I don't think that's quite what I'm saying, but I've said what I think.
All right.
What about you? Anything that's been on your mind? Anything that's come up with you?
I just want to see it again, because
I still fancy seeing
I think,
it again.
We've talked about it quite a lot, and I don't think we've exhausted talking about it. And really, I think it's a credit to the film that, so one of the things I was telling you earlier today, was, that I was so wrapped up in the story that I really wasn't paying attention to the shots, and the compositions and, how the shots were lined up and how they interconnected with each other and, the editing and kind of, so how a film is put together, which normally is a great interest of mine, is one of the things I noticed immediately. And actually, I was so wrapped up, and time flew by so quickly for me that I just didn't pay attention to that. And I would like kind of, to go back to it and kind of, and explore those kind of more in detail.
One thing that I noticed that came to mind, which was interesting, is how you get all these things where the actors have been edited into things, particularly, actually, mainly Leonardo DiCaprio. I think it's only Leonardo DiCaprio. He's edited into various things. And then you also get these kind of...
Escape and the FBI story and so on, yeah.
And you also get these kind of pastiches and things, or like fake episodes of things that he had done. But when Sharon Tate, played by Margot Robbie, goes to see her film in the theatre, that's not edited. The Sharon Tate in the film is Sharon Tate.
Yes.
And the Sharon Tate watching it is Margot Robbie.
Yes.
And, and that's interesting, because, I mean, it has that bit where she's remembering doing her training with Bruce Lee for the karate scene. And so you see the clip of the film, cuts to a clip of Margot Robbie training with Bruce Lee, and back and forth, and it's very clear they're not the same person. There's no attempt here to kind of fit her in or anything. There's like a respect for that one film, I guess, because it's not something that they're trying to fit a fake character into. She's playing a real person, as opposed to DiCaprio, who isn't. Which I that kind of there was a detail that I noticed that I kind of like.
Well, I think you're right that it's significant that the DiCaprio character is inserted into all of this, and one of them is a dream sequence, right? It's what he would have been like in The Great Escape.
Yeah.
Whereas the Margot Robbie character isn't, and that could just be, because the Margot Robbie character is a supporting character. The film is about, Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, the characters they play. And Margot Robbie is just a catalyst, yeah. But obviously there's also the running thematic of celebrity, yes, and they're both not quite stars, yeah, people who haven't quite made it. Yeah, one is on the way down, the other one's on the way up. So, yeah, there's maybe something there. The Matt Helm films, which are like American James Bond films with Dean Martin, are, well, actually I quite like the first one, and then then this one was just, it's just terrible, really, and you could tell that it's terrible from, what you see of it,
yeah.
Dean
But she got very good reviews for it, Sharon Tate, and although I guess it's kind of interesting that she got very good reviews, and she's represented in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood through this film in which she played a klutz. That's her character. She's the klutz character.
It's not even her best known film or anything, really. So.
So why pick that one?
Yes. Though it is very much in tune with all of those, posters for Suzanne Plachette films and Elke Summer films, and I mean, I think in a way, actually, one of the things that fascinated me about the film is you always imagine that these films are just really trash B stuff. And what you see, actually, is they're just failed films. They're films, they were mainstream films with probably big stars that did play in first-run houses, well, according to this film, right? And they were just not successful. So they're no longer part of our imaginary, though they're very much part of Tarantino's. Yeah. George Papard films and, Suzanne Plachette and Elke Summers and it was a Christopher something or other, right? Like there are people who are names in that period, right? But who never became like, I don't know, Audrey Hepburn or Barbra Streisand or people like that, right? Now they didn't become first-rank stars, but I imagine the films were probably, major releases. They weren't, AFI releases. Yeah, they weren't like, the kinds of films that Peter Fonda made for Corman. Right, yeah, they were big studio releases, so just flops.
Yeah. Thoughts on Brad Pitt in his shirt?
I
sexy with the shirt or without it?
Oh, I think he's incredibly sexy. Actually, I just love the way he moves. I think actually, he's aging well, and age becomes him, because I think there was something about Brad Pitt, for me anyway. Like all my mates would disagree with me. But there was something about Brad Pitt in his 20s and 30s that you almost wanted to hit, really. Like, he was just so incredibly good looking. It was like, nature is so unjust, right? Like, yeah, there was kind of...
Was it that he was good looking and talented, or just good looking?
No, just good looking, because actually I didn't think he was talented. I remember...
I don't think anyone did for a while.
Well, and with reason, because... For example, the performance that he got Oscar nominated for, the one in 12 Monkeys, he's atrocious in that. He's overacting all over the place like a mad monkey, right? So it was with reason that people had reservations about him as an actor. So, and it's that thing, you can see how somebody could be very effective as a star, but not necessarily be a good actor. But anyway, I think, he was so good looking that it was almost outrageous, right? And so on the one hand, you appreciated it, but on the other hand, it didn't necessarily sit well. Was actually kind of seeing him aging, which, because the thing about aging is also you've had a degree of agency in terms of what you've become, right? Like kind of, when you're younger, it's nature. Like in a way, okay. Right? But actually when you get older, you mean
you're to blame for this?
I am to blame for the way I look.
Jesus.
It's all my fault. Kind of. Yeah, so I think... Anyway, I think he looks fantastic. I love the way he moves. I love the way he holds himself. And he gives a great performance. So...
Yeah.
Though not as great as Leonardo DiCaprio's, who I think, just the more I think about it, I think it's almost like genius, really, because it's not really noticeable, and he's obvious. It's a skill to play somebody who's not very bright, So he's not very bright and he's not very talented, and yet he's moving through all of those different registers, throughout the film. I think it's an amazing tour de force performance for connoisseurs, for those who can pick out that actually, and this moment he's giving this very stylized performance. In this moment he's in character. In this moment he's himself.
Something that kind of struck me is that those moments when he's on set, when he's playing the bad guy, but he's not acting. He's still kind of performing. When he cries
in public.
Well, when he reads the book next to the little girl, and he kind of in explaining the plot of the book, it basically becomes clear it's all about him, and he starts breaking down. Like it's kind of halfway between it being a genuine breakdown and you feeling like he's still performing his breakdown.
Well,
when he's in his trailer on his own, no one's there to see it.
Well,
his kind of little freak out, but he's performing his breakdown.
That's right. He's an actor. You often actually, one of the things that's very interesting is the biographies of stars by their own children. Talking about to what degree is this really happening? To what degree is, my mom acting what she thinks is really happening? For me, the audience, right? So, and I think one of the beauties of DiCaprio's performance is that he makes you ask those questions as well, right? But it happens in so many different ways. I mean, his acting, the Steve McQueen film, is like hilarious, right? Like he's so bad.
The Great Escape.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean that thing about an actor doing bad acting, in character. I mean, it's really it's kind of like a layer upon layer upon layer of performance, which is very deliberate.
To be fair, I will back myself up and say that I don't think it's exact. I mean, I did say it was kind of performing bad acting. I'm not sure that it is. I think it's performing a very obvious style of acting.
Yes.
But he does it very well, and I think even on TV, in the context, it would actually be a good performance.
No. Let's be clear. I mean, I think you're right. I agree. It's a style of performance, and it's a style of very effective performance in some bits, right? And then in that bit of The Great Escape, it's really bad performance. Right?
No. I was only speaking there about the TV show sequences that you see.
Well, but what I think is great about DiCaprio's performance is that he gives you all of those different variations.
Yeah.
And actually, it's with enormous scope.
It's really subtle. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Do you wrap up?
All right. So, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
all that shit I said before.
There you go.